Okay, so I am about to make a ground beef and pasta skillet. I'll link the recipe below. I'm using a recipe from Cooking Light magazine. However, instead of pasta, I am using this shells and cheese using organic butternut squash. So you can see they have the butternut squash kind of like it's supposed to be shells, and then they have organic cheddar cheese in there. So it's a very simple recipe because it just has the shells and cheese, onion, ground beef, tomato sauce, and some Italian seasoning. The recipe calls for mushrooms, but I forgot to buy the mushrooms. So now I'm just going to get ready to put the ground beef and the onions in the skillet. Okay, so now that the ground beef and the onions are all cooked together, and I also added some salt and pepper, now I'm going to I've put in a half of a cup of onions. So now I'm going to add the tomato sauce with the Italian seasoning and then the shells and cheese. Now in the original recipe, you're supposed to add water and then put a lid on it because you have to cook the pasta. But, you know, this doesn't have to cook for very long, so I don't think I'm going to add any water. We'll see. I might add a little bit of water, but I'm going to put this in with the cheese and everything and see how it comes out. Okay, so I went ahead and I added the water and then also some garlic powder, which was something else the recipe called for. So I added water to this and I put this lid on it and I simmered it for a while so that the butternut squash could get more cooked. And then, yeah, I haven't added the cheese yet, so now I'm going to go ahead and add the cheese mix. If you don't have this shells and cheese, you can use your own cheese, which is in the recipe. You know, they use real pasta and they're using shredded cheese. So you can like chop up your own butternut squash into little chunks like this and then add your own shredded cheese. So I'm going to show you the finished product after I put the cheese in here. Okay, so I just stirred in the cheese and this is the finished product. So it looks really good. Cheesy, beefy skillet. Okay, so I'm going to make this carrot and squash curry soup, and it's by the Pioneer Woman. So if you just Google Pioneer Woman and carrot and squash soup, you will find the recipe. It's an extremely easy recipe that actually tastes so much better than the sum of its parts. So what you need is yellow squash, so it's a perfect fall recipe. You're supposed to use 3 carrots, but I accidentally bought 4, so I'm going to be using 4 carrots, 1 onion, some curry powder. I didn't have any garlic, so I'm going to be using this minced garlic. And then you need chicken broth, and I'm going to be using my homemade this is my homemade bone broth. So you see a lot of stuff in there. That's just because it's a homemade, really thick bone broth that I had in the freezer. So I made it last year, so I'm finally going to be using it up for this recipe. So this is a very simple recipe. I'm going to cut everything up and then come back to you in a second. Okay, so step 1 is putting in a little bit of olive oil with the onions and the carrots and the garlic. And so these are going to cook for a few minutes. And so while this is cooking, I'm going to cut up the squash. The thing about this recipe, you might think that it's kind of sweet because it has all these carrots in it. But to me, this recipe is a very hearty, earthy recipe. To me it tastes like it has mushrooms in it. You know how earthy mushrooms are? That's how this recipe tastes. It's so delicious, I've even made it for company before. Okay, so after the carrots and the onions and the garlic cooked for a few minutes, now I've just added in the squash. Now if you've never looked at this yellow squash before, it's very soft. It's not like some of the other squashes. You see how soft it is? And the rind is very soft. So it was very easy to chop up See how soft it is? I just put it in here. I haven't stirred it up yet because I wanted you to see how the squash looked. So now we're going to stir all of this together and then let it cook for a few minutes before I add in the curry. Okay, so now I've added all of the bone broth, and you see, and the curry is in there, so it smells so delicious. So now this has to simmer for an hour. I'm going to put the lid on here and we're going to let this cook. And while this is cooking, I'm going to clean up my kitchen, and I'm also going to be making some of the Goodies peanut butter cookies for the first time. Okay, so the recipe for these Goodies peanut butter cookies, only 3 net carbs per cookie, very simple. It just calls for 1 egg, a half a cup of butter or coconut oil, and 1 teaspoon of vanilla. So I just mixed everything up here, and now I'm going to put it on my little silicone baking sheet. Okay, so the soup has been simmering for an hour, so it's all done. Now I'm going to use my immersion blender here. I'm not going to turn it on because of how loud it is, but I'm going to blend this up right in the pot and then get back to you. Okay, so my soup is all done, and I've divided it up into servings like I always do. So 1 serving is going to be a cup. So I'm going to have this for the next 3 days. Then I put 3 cups in each one of these. I'm going to put these in the freezer for later. And then this is some soup that I'm going to give to my friend when she comes over. So yeah. And then here are the peanut butter cookies. They look beautiful. They're soft. They smell like peanut butter. I'm not going to try them yet until tomorrow because I'm already done eating for today. So I will come back and let you know really quickly what I think about them tomorrow.